Have you ever flown a Metroliner? Because I haven't, and most others haven't as well. Well, today we're flying a Metroliner from America's most haunted airport. Most of y'all know the conspiracies floating around Denver's airport, and today we're flying one of their main airlines, Denver Air Connection, on their flight to Cortez, Colorado, a small town on the other side of the Rockies. By the way, there is an airport hotel here in Denver for $580 per night, so this was my bed. A quiet but freezing corner of the B concourse before the sun came up so I could leave security and get my footage. That being said, welcome to the curb of Denver's only terminal, known as the Jeppesen Terminal, with the east and west side of one shared space. As Denver is a united hub, the west side is basically united in their partners, and the rest share the east side, including Denver Air Connection, which has just one counter despite this being their main hub, kinda reminding me of Logan Air in Glasgow. Mobile boarding passes don't work, but once we had the boarding pass in hand, I learned that, for some reason, the TSA pre-check line is like a 10-mile walk from the check-in counters, unless you're flying with United. But that does grant you an excellent view of Denver's iconic roof of the Jeppesen Terminal, meant to resemble the snowy Rocky Mountains and indigenous teepees, plus the only ever ski and snowboard baggage claim I've seen in my travels, as the Rocky Mountains offer some of the best slopes in the world. Once through security, you've got to take a train to your concourse, A, B, or C, except for a small walkway to the A gates. So why not just walk? Well, the Denver airport actually ranks second in the world by size, but it also sixth largest by passenger count, so there's no shortage of aircraft. They're the second busiest domestic airport in the US, with one less destination than Chicago O'Hare, and they've been adding more international services considering passengers can connect to over 200 destinations in the US alone. This includes the new daily Turkish Airlines service, plus Lufthansa recently announced that Denver will see the A380 soon, obviously aided by the whole Star Alliance thing. The A concourse is the only one connected to immigration, so it houses all international arrivals, plus Delta, Frontier, and JetBlue. Concourse B has the most gates, with 72, and is 100% United as the airport's largest carrier, with a nearly 50% market share. Then Concourse C is ours. This is mostly Southwest as Denver's second biggest carrier, plus a little American and Alaska, and then all the regional carriers like Denver Air Connection, which is housed in one of the many renovated and expanded parts of the airport. There's no lounges, unfortunately, but there is a fun terrace right at the gate to enjoy the sub-freezing, snowy morning to bask in the many conspiracies that circle the airport, like Lucifer the horse statue that killed its artist, gargoyles protecting the luggage, secret tunnels for the rich, military, or possible aliens or lizard people, involvement with the New World Order and Freemasons, murals and runway setups resembling Nazi culture, and people claiming to see alien language lettering. So whether you believe it or not, the lore around the airport's definitely fun entertainment. Our flight was delayed 2 hours since Denver's braking action was nil, essentially meaning there was no traction on the ramp, so they were in a ground stop. In the meantime, they made sure everyone had a physical boarding pass as we waited to board, plus since the Metroliner definitely ain't quiet, they do have a stockpile of earplugs, which came in real handy. Eventually, we were ready for boarding, and they scanned in all 8 passengers before our ramp escort walked us out to the airplane. Nothing better than walking through black ice with your shoes covering up with snow in sub-zero temperatures, so bring a coat and proceed with caution. It was a great time to see the pair of Fairchild Swearingen Metroliners on the ramp here. Denver Air Connection has 5 of these beasts, and this one is a little over 30 years old, and it looks like it. That's part of the fun. To make these planes, they took the fuselage and similar nose from the Merlin, a twin turboprop corporate aircraft, and merged it with Beechcraft parts before a number of changes through the different generations. This one is one of the 9th and final models of the Metroliner. These aircraft are mostly cargo these days, but were designed to hold 19 people. Denver Air Connection, however, uses these routes for essential air service and charter routes, so they don't need 19 people. They put only 9 seats in here, which also helps at the high altitudes they operate at. We'll look at the seats a bit more once we get in the sky, but because of the low density configuration, there's like a whole city of legroom. And it's staggered, so you also have a ton of space laterally. I will say that turboprops get hated on, especially by non-aviation enthusiasts, but they're some of the most efficient aircraft out there and tend to have more legroom in my experience. Denver's location brings some gnarly weather, especially being on the leeward side of the enormous Rocky Mountains. This day brought less than 1,000 meters of visibility and heavy snow, which meant that we were bound first for the de-icing pad, which is a tough reminder of how large the airport is. We spent 35 minutes taxiing, plus the time it took to de-ice. Not for the weak. But on a day like today with icy runways, it's a good thing that the runways in Denver are long, especially for landing, with less than stellar braking performance. They had the space available for the long runways, but it's also great to have with the altitude, but one of them is an extra 4,000 feet. That way, it can be a backup landing site for the space shuttle. So who is Denver Air Connection, you ask? You probably weren't asking, but I'm going to tell you in about 30 seconds here. Denver Air Connection is a subsidiary of Key Lime Air, which is the main brand for the commuter airline services based in Denver, plus some cargo flights, although Denver Air Connection is only for the passenger side of things. They aren't all that big, with the Embraer 145 being their biggest aircraft at the moment, supplemented with Dorniers, Brazilias, and Metroliners. They mostly specialize in charter flights and thinner scheduled routes, which is why we see them out of Denver to places like Cortez, Alliance, McCook, and Alamosa. But while Denver is their main market, they do have substations in places like Atlanta, Dallas, Minneapolis, and Chicago to other small markets. And to help passengers, they have interline partnerships with United, Delta, and American, which allows passengers to get to and from these small markets to major hubs and then to wherever else in the world they might be going. Just on my flight alone, for example, I met someone who was connecting from Tokyo, booked on one ticket from Tokyo to Cortez through Denver. Makes you wonder how many times that itinerary has been booked. The seats look a bit janky, but honestly I found them to be more comfortable than the economy seats of Spirit, American, and the new British Airways seats. I actually got over an hour of uninterrupted sleep on the return flight. I did find it funny that the seats appeared to be numbered, but it was really just the windows that were numbered, as 7A and 8A were labeled above the windows at just my seat. There is an overhead panel with air vent and lights, which were operated by buttons on the counter to the side. Unfortunately, there's no table or anything, so if you brought stuff on board, be ready to hold it in your lap, unless it does fit on that counter. I thought this was a charging port, but it was just a ground heater that happened to be in this location in the cabin. In the seat back pocket in front of you, there's a rare Metroliner safety card, but also an oxygen mask for emergencies. The cabin is pressurized, but if it were to lose pressurization, there's an overhead panel with no masks. Instead, this thing plugs into these things in the overhead, which are connected to a tank with enough oxygen to get everyone down to a lower altitude while conscious. The interesting thing about these planes is they don't fly at the same height as the jets, with a service ceiling of only 25,000 feet, which puts us in a couple predicaments. First off, remember that weather and storm that were going on in Denver? Well, it continues across the mountains, and this altitude puts us right in it, leading to moderate turbulence the entire flight with short bouts of severe turbulence, resulting in major altitude deviations. The benefit, however, is that we were within cell service for most of the flight. There's no Wi-Fi or entertainment on board, obviously, but there was just enough service for me to watch Jumanji on my phone. Now, on the entertainment front, the newer turboprops have far better insulation. These older ones, however, are loud, and that's why those earplugs are so useful. Noise-canceling headphones would also be great, but I left mine charging at home next to my bed, and my AirPods at full volume still weren't loud enough to hear anything. The other predicament about this aircraft is the lack of lavatories. There's 9 seats, but the back of the cabin is only the aft bulkhead, and then the baggage compartment behind that. So definitely use the lavatory before boarding, which they did warn us about roughly 15 minutes prior to boarding. Do you ever wonder how an airport like Cortez, Colorado got airline services? Or Bishop, California? Or Presque Isle, Maine? It all comes down to something known as essential air service. This isn't unique to the US, as lots of places have similar practices. The US, however, spends by far the most money on it. Boiling it down, essential air service is a way to subsidize routes so that disconnected markets can travel with ease. When the topic of EAS comes up, the biggest question asked, especially by Europeans, is why we don't just use a train. Honestly, trains can be great in the east coast of the US, but in the west, things are just too spread out, making it too difficult for a train service to actually connect these places efficiently. So the next best thing is air travel. Typically, the way it works out is the government will bring in a flight connection and will help to make sure the airline doesn't lose money. They promise a certain amount of seats, and then the government covers the cost of what remains unsold. Airlines like it because it gives them a way to test new markets, and the cities like it because it gives people a way to travel without having to drive for hours to reach their next closest option. Some of these routes are served by mainline carriers like United's service to Prescott, Arizona, or Delta's service to Traverse City, Michigan. And others are served by smaller commuter airlines like Southern Airlines' service to Lafayette, Indiana, or Denver Air Connection to Cortez. Regardless, you can bet that it'll be a small aircraft. Maybe not like this thing, but still a regional jet or turboprop typically. So while it does cost the government some money, it does allow more opportunities for smaller cities and the people nearby. For aviation enthusiasts, there's two things that excite us: rare aircraft and rare routes, and this flight has both of them. Nothing like a good Metroliner, but also nothing like an airport like Cortez, whose TSA agents work part-time and only open 15 minutes before each flight. A terminal building with basically the same square footage as your average coat closet. But that's what makes it fun. I mean, I'd like to imagine that this is one of the first videos out there about the Cortez airport. I do think the Metroliners are fun to fly on, but not exactly practical. There's plenty of aircraft that could operate this route without a loss that have things like a lavatory or even charging or Wi-Fi at times. So while it's a great adventure for av geeks, I'm sure the general public would rather have one of those refreshed aircraft. That being said, it's always great to see small communities like this getting air services. In Europe, it's much more common to see train services, as things can be a bit more compact, but in the western half of the United States, things can be so spread out that air travel is the only way to access them. I mean, imagine you live in Cortez and need to visit your family in Boston. You could take the multi-day train, or you could drive 2 hours to the Durango airport, which sees United services, or, thanks to Denver Air Connection, you can now just fly from your home airport to Boston with one stop. Much more convenient. I am curious what rare experience you guys have had though. In the comments below, let me know what the most rare aircraft you've ever flown on, or the rarest route, so we can make it a game and see who's had the wildest experience. While y'all fight over that, however, until next Sunday, safe travels. I'll see y'all next time.